Hello and welcome to a unusual Saturday show, but I had the opportunity to bring on two guests to talk about a very pertinent topic. For those of you who are on Twitter, you will be aware of the great Panda Express war of 2025, one of the first big internet battles we had over the topic of young men's employment prospects. And this was hot on the tail of the H-1B visa debate, which I did a little write-up of in a in real life talk that I gave in California. But it was followed almost immediately by this conversation started by Chris Rufo about how viable low status service sector jobs were to young men who were having well-known economic woes. And this is something that started a firestorm on Twitter. I was very notably being on the anti-Chris Rufo side, but I have with me here today I want to emphasize this, guys. These are two of the best Substackers in our sphere. I'm having a hard time thinking of people who consistently write as well and as frequently as both Johann Kurtz from the Becoming Noble Substack and the Librarian of Solano. How do you pronounce that? I'm not used to speaking it.
Yeah, everybody's, it's always the same thing. It's technically pronounced Kalino. With a hard,
Okay.
yeah, but so people say Salino. Whatever's easier for you is fine.
Yes. Well, it's weird because I think who are the people who could be in your series? Like John Carter and the guy from Social Matter come to mind. But I feel like I should be asking both of you how you produce so much quality work so frequently. I feel like I always go to snail's pace, but I'm so glad to have you on because you both wrote articles about this topic. So I wanted to kind of take your perspectives. I don't know. I feel like Johann, since you had the first article and the one that kind of agreed with you, do you want to introduce your point and outline the controversy, I guess?
Sure. Yeah. Well, thank you. Really, thank you so much for having me on. It's a great honor to be here, and I've been listening to your channel for almost 10 years.
Oh, wow.
So this is I sort of communicated to you when we met in person how much of a fan I was, but no, it's cool to be here.
That's great. I've only been doing this for 10 years, but thank you.
So the debate, as I'm sure most of the audience will be aware, was whether or not, well, it was something of a Rorschach test in that everyone could project their own particular concerns onto it. When Chris Rufo actually made a fairly innocuous statement, which was not particularly value-laden at first, which was to point to the fact that there were a strong showing in the economy in terms of what you would expect to be low-paid jobs, like fast food assistant managers, offering surprisingly high compensation. People came back at that and said, well, you're deflecting from the fundamental point here, which is that is a low status, low skill job in which you're going to be predominantly working amongst non-native born Americans in a sector that a lot of Americans look down on, fast food, because of the perceived low quality of its output. Other people, and Chris was sort of gently on this side. He wasn't particularly strident about it. Other figures like Mike Cernovich, Rob Henderson were much more strident, and they said, well, if you're a young man and you don't have elite prospects, how dare you turn your nose up at this working class job? This is great money. You've got to work, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. This is how careers are made. You should start, where you can earn money and you can start getting on the career ladder and so forth. And everyone, the problem is that it's never clear where anyone is arguing from and who they're speaking to in a space like Twitter.
That is the critical problem here. And I don't think that there is actually a disagreement between the three of us. I think that it's mainly going to break down to that. But I think that this controversy is very interesting. But go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt.
I'll keep it very short because I think we'll have lots of points to make, and I suspect we'll agree on a lot. I think actually our mutual Adrian Vermeulen, librarian, summed it up quite well. I'll just read a short tweet of his. He said, as far as I can make out, the youth are arguing that the system in which they are condemned to struggle is harmful and unjust, and that it can and should be changed. it's simply not a relevant response to that argument to give them advice about what they should be doing as individuals within that unjust system on the question begging assumption that the system itself cannot or should not be changed. My point that I made in the article, I won't summarize the whole thing, but the two key points were that A, if you are on an elite track, but you don't have immediate options in front of you to make more than 70,000, you should think very hard before you take a fast food job purely for the money. One of these reasons is that it will interrupt your CV in ways that will make it difficult for you to return to the elite track. The second of which was that I thought that a lot of the people that were advocating for this were underselling how much damage a significant downwards shift in social status can have on an individual. They were selling it as if that's a trivial concern. I actually don't think it is. A lot of people misread me on this to say that there's something wrong with taking that, jobs that the capitalist system as a whole regards as low status. What I in fact meant was status within the meaningful relationships that you need to maintain in the course of your everyday life. For example, if you meet a girl that you want to make your wife, you have to describe your life to her and your values, your ambitions, your achievements, and so forth. And if that starts out with, I'm a trainee assistant manager at Panda Express, it's going to make the life you want to lead amongst the people that you want to be around significantly harder. This was not a blanket critique of working class jobs, which have their own status mechanics that I think it would be interesting to get into. But that was the fundament of the article.
Yeah, and I don't want to pile on because Library of Solano had an excellent article in response to that. But just to add sort of some flourish to your statement, Johann Kurtz, for people who don't know the biography of me, I went to undergraduate for engineering and got a dual degree in mechanical engineering and computer science. But after I got my degree, I was so burnt out. I decided that I just moved to a random city, and me and a roommate got a job at Safeway. Like, cause I applied to grad school, and I'm like, I just forgot about the application. I was so burnt out on school, but I worked there for about 3-4 months, going into 5, and first of all, like, I did get people were telling me, like, you have to just quit this and do something else because you had a stellar academic record, and the people see you worked at this job, they'll think that you did something stupid, or you weren't really on the ball to have something lined up after college. Even though I was kind of just doing this whole bohemian thing. This is back in the late aughts, where the economy hadn't gotten to the stage where you could do this, right? But they were telling me that, and when I later tried to come up with a resume, I just ended up dropping that entire half year from record. Like, I took a giant vacation. I mean, it essentially was treated that way. And to kind of add some color too, I was in the service industry when it was still a majority native, but my friends from the service industry, they were very obviously a class below mine. They had large drug problems. Several of the women had illegitimate children, and they were my age. And this would have been if I had decided to make this my life, I can't really imagine. I would have had to take a downgrade in a very huge way. And so, I can see what you're saying there, Johann. But not to kind of bring you well on the tail end of that, but I think Librarian, you also had kind of like an interesting take on this too. Like, I think you were thinking more along the lines that I was thinking when I kind of ditched my professional trajectory in my 20s, that you could kind of like look at this as a way to kind of reject the system as a whole, not to put words in your mouth.
Yes. So, and by the way, I should mention Johann Kurtz. I have liked your work for a very long time, and I was looking back at my post, my second ever post that I ever made on Substack. I was referencing you already, so that was how far back my I guess my fandom goes with that. And I hesitated to be critical, but like Dave Green said, what I wanted to do in my piece was kind of take a step back and do two things. One was kind of address this, what I could charitably call kind of cognitive dissonance, or maybe uncharitably call it kind of schizophrenia almost on the right, about what we should want. To some degree, this comes from a healthy place, I think, because there's a lot of intellectual ferment on the right about what a good life is, about what you should want out of life. You know, there's people on the one hand who say you should just lead a life of adventure and Nietzschean vitalism, untethered to any kind of community connections or anything like that. And then you've got people on the other side who are saying, you know, family and tradition and everything like that. So there's like all these different things about what you should, which really plays a big role in this idea of the second thing I was kind of wanting to unpack, wanting to get into, this notion of what it means to have status and the relationship between status and the system. So I wholly agree with Dr. Vermeulen. I'm a big fan of his as well, where he says offering individual advice to people in lieu of a more general idea of how to, you know, change the system is a bad idea, which I agree with. But then, to my mind, it logically follows from that if it's so bad that the system needs to be changed and reformed wholesale, then why are we adapting ourselves to that? Why are we looking to these people for status, for validation? Why am I spending my youth curating my LinkedIn status and making sure there's not a blotch on my record, that every score is in the top 5%? Why am I doing that? To appeal to the people who tanked our economy in 2008, who sent 5,000 Americans to their deaths in the war, 20 years of war on terror, impoverishing the country to the tune of something like $7 trillion, having gained nothing, having, you know, failed to predict the rise of Donald Trump, or even the reason why Donald Trump might come into power. The people who have taken the tech industry and turned it into an instrument of state power and censorship. Why are they the elite? What makes them the elite? And why should we want to be like them? Now, I'm not saying it's a bad idea necessarily to jump on board, and if you can get one of these jobs, work it and be a part of that. But at the same time, something else needs to be getting built. And I am very hesitant to if young men ask me, and I pointed this out in a bunch of things I've written, I deal with young men every day. I'm a teacher at an all-boys school. I teach juniors and seniors who are about to go off to college, about to go off to their lives. So this comes up a lot. And I'm always telling them, you know, just think about the life you want to lead and how you're going to get it. Don't shape and mold yourself to be what someone else expects you to be, unless it's something you think is going to benefit you.
Yeah. And I mean, I think that this is, I'm hoping I'm prefacing what you're saying, but it's very infuriating because I see exactly what you're saying, Librarian Solano. It does make sense to kind of break with the system totally. I guess my one thing, and I think maybe where sort of the middle ground lies, it would be so different if this conversation were become a restaurateur or a high class chef. It would be almost the same work, but it would have a certain status and dignity to it. I know lots of people who went and started vineyards and restaurants and all of this stuff out of college and ignored their degree, and they're in many ways closer to actual status and power than the people who took my mindless tech route.
So I think because you offer a very useful provocation, it would be useful from my perspective to disentangle two things. And it's probably the lack of clarity in my writing that has entangled these in the first place. There's status on the one hand, and there is what you were able to communicate to a potential employer on the other. And those are two separate things. What do you want status for in terms of a good life? I argued in my piece, what you want is family. You want a wife, children. This is for most people. Obviously, some people will have some kind of extraordinary calling, monastic, ascetic, whatever it is. You want wife, children, and property is some kind of reasonable assimilation of the good life. When I said that it's important to preserve your status when choosing a job, I didn't mean status in the eyes of, you know, Mr. Capitalist, monopoly man. I meant status in the eyes of your friends, your family. Social status is about how the people around you perceive you. And it's characterized by things like respect and them ascribing a certain level of competence on you, that you are diligent, hardworking, able to be cognizant of their interests and protect them and so forth. That was what I meant by status. separately, you have to be concerned about the curation of your CV, but that is as an instrument to allow you to get a job that allows you to then downstream deliver on the commitments that your social status underpins. So I'm not saying you should make decisions to theoretically impress a prospective employer on a personal level. I'm saying that you should make intelligent career decisions that can get you a career that can deliver the things that actually matter to you in life, whatever those are. Now, my problem with the Panda Express example, to sort of like join up with what Dave was saying earlier, is it's not clear to me that that actually is any kind of break from the system. So I would definitely agree if we were talking about a working class career, if you weren't on an elite track and you needed a career, if we were talking about trades, anything with genuine skill involved, with a potentially high cap in earnings in which you can start your own business and build independence, build skills, instantiate yourself in a working class community and carve out a life for yourself, I think that's fantastic. But for me, the kind of services jobs that were being discussed are really the antithesis of all those things. In fact, they had the characteristics of all of the worst things of corporate America and none of the best things. You know, they're sort of subject to mega corporation DEI and other policies. The hours that you're expected to work get in the way of family formation, evenings and weekends. You're working embedded in groups of people that really aren't anything like you. There is a cap on your earnings. You're not well placed to start a business off the back of that in the same way you would be if you were a plumber, for example. It's unfulfilling, and again, it's universally regarded as low status amongst the people that it is actually important to impress, not just theoretical bosses, but friends, family, and potential spouses.
I'm going to compliment you with a quote from your article. And unfortunately, I've read your article like 2 or 3 times and I've only read the Librarians once because it came out later. So I have your quotes ready to go. I do not have the Librarians, and it's not to mean that I didn't like the articles equally. But you say, was it, I forget, was it Rob Long, who was the person you're responding to on the sort of pro Panda Express side? You said, Rob talks about the importance of supporting your life's meaning when working a bad job with the 4 pillars of meaning, meaning faith, family, vocation, and community. The problem is it's precisely the working class that has lost these elements of meaning the most. By giving up an elite white collar profession, you're also damaging your shot at these other pillars of meaning. And that is what immediately struck me during my interactions with sort of the lower class, is with some exceptions, the exception being people who work for the military, in which these pillars of meaning are stronger. So there are some exceptions. The working class has a looser grasp on meaning, and when you enter it temporarily, you feel yourself adopting a lot of their bad habits, and you also feel yourself getting further and further away from the things that previously gave your life meaning, that were sort of extracurricular, I guess. And so that's, I mean, I know this is not what the Librarian meant, but you know, the problem is that I feel like I want to break from the system. I want to break from this tech coding world, which is so utterly poisonous. But at the same time, you know, it feels like you're fighting against a tidal wave of cultural decline when you interact with these lower class positions. And I don't know, I think, Librarian, probably you might have experienced something similar.
Oh yes, very much so. I've mentioned a few times I spent 13 years working for Marriott in a variety of capacities, everything from waiting tables to moving furniture around for banquets and things like that, parking cars, all that. And the people I worked with, for the most part, were not the most together people on earth. They tended, especially the servers, and any restaurant you go to, I've worked in several other places. The typical situation is you've got people who have either emotional problems, substance abuse problems, or more commonly both. They've made a lot of bad decisions. They don't think very far into the future. They have a lot of difficulties, not all, not universally. And there's some people, usually older people, who have made a life out of it, who are much more together. And there are people who come in and out of that world when they just need work and go back and forth. Who have it. But the people who tend to work in those places do have a lot of those problems, right? They're not really together. But that's just sort of, to me, downstream of a lot of the other problems that are coming from further along. You know, the moral decline of those working class people in large part comes from the fact that they understand their job is very, very tenuous. They understand that their hours will be cut at any waking moment. If there's not enough work for them to do, they can't depend on a paycheck that week. It's really, really hard. And the reason for that is the people above them, the people who have higher status than them, just basically see them as a means to an end. They use them, they burn them out, they toss them aside. And the lack of ethics and the lack of commitment to society, to the world, to a greater purpose, anything like that, is, to my mind, an after effect of the fact that the people above them think that way and are just able to sort of use their power to shift the negative effects of that down onto the people below them. If the people in corporate in Marriott who are making all this money are making it because they treat the people as just things to be used, means to an end, as opposed to human beings who have lives, who need to flourish. And that's kind of the problem. I don't really think of middle class people as being more together necessarily. They're just the next step up in that general state, system of exploitation and abuse.
Well, I guess maybe here we might actually come up on some disagreement. In my experience, like I said, with the exception of military is sort of notably in key aspects less degenerated than the upper middle class. But the upper middle class has almost an easier time connecting to traditional values than does the lower native class, even before these jobs all got invaded by people who came to the country in the last few months.
Here's the key thing. That yes, in their personal lives, they're much more together. They're more law-abiding. They're more church-going. They're more everything like that. That word you used, though, invaded. The people that came, they didn't invade. They were brought over by those upper middle class people.
Yeah.
That's the thing. All the people that want to join this class want to join the class of the people who created this problem in the first place. The people who, if you're saying like, I want to curate my resume, I want to join this elite, I want to have a high status, I want to be one of the upper level Marriott people. You're one of the people impoverishing the working class. And yeah, you as a person might be keeping your life together very well. You might be very law abiding, but you are part of a global neoliberal managerial elite that is grinding the working class into powder for your economic gain while you go to church doing it, which is my basic issue.
I thought there was a real striking lack of recognition of exactly what you're describing amongst the bootstraps crowd, which is I think you were fantastic on this in your article. Chivalry Guild had a good article coming from the same perspective, and Indian Bronson on Twitter has been hammering the same points as well, which I think are completely valid, which is you cannot advocate for any kind of elite path out of this dysfunction without a commensurate recognition of the principle of noblesse oblige. And what a lot of major commentators were missing on this front, as they were saying, no, look how well paid this Panda Express position is, why don't you take it? One of the reasons that young people were reacting so negatively to that, even though the money was theoretically good, is that there was no recognition in that statement that the youth that are going into a lot of these jobs are actually facing hostile conditions which have been brought about by our political elites. They require solidarity, they require support. There was no reminder of the necessity of the noble pursuit of raising up the next generation, taking on those people. There was no advising parents on how to secure serious employment for their children, through internships or networking, family businesses, anything like that. There was there was a bit of, let's apply some political pressure to reduce immigration, reduce anti-white policies and so forth. But all in all, the moral dimensions from the major commentators on this issue were totally lacking. And I think you're absolutely right to call that out.
And this is definitely not Librarian, but what made this, again, I'm just going to digress because this is not the conversation the intelligent people here are having, but people know about this conflict because not because of even what Chris Rufo said, but because of all of the boomer commenters after him who piled on like all of these like just ridiculous pieces of advice. It got to the point where you had people talking about dumpster dive. Well, I've done dumpster diving before at Trader Joe's when I was in that, aforementioned proletariat position. It was kind of fun. But they're talking about like serious life advice for young people, and it involves sleeping in a ditch, dumpster diving, spending all your time at libraries, and it was like basically they were superimposing this kind of like Allen Ginsberg, Jack Kerouac romanticism of being down and out on this serious economic problem of young people not having the ability to start families and become part of society properly. and this is not what anyone here says, but that was like 90% of the reactions were against those kind of sentiments. And there was a bizarre way where these sentiments were kind of like implicitly creeping into intelligent people's Twitter feeds who must know better, like Matt Walsh and Wilford Riley and all those other people.
So yeah, there's a lot to go through there. I mean, there's one thing I've noticed about Twitter, especially more so than Substack, is that Twitter, there are certain things like almost like hotkeys that you can press in someone's brain, where you say a word like McDonald's, and all of a sudden, like Chris Rufo could mention, theoretically speaking, if you got a job as a McDonald's manager, you can make $100,000 a year, and it's actually not a bad idea for some people. But the trigger words there, like work at McDonald's, all of a sudden it just creates this huge chain of associations in people's minds. Like, he's telling everybody to work at McDonald's, and he wants to bring in a bunch of immigrants, and he wants, and it's like all that you've just created this whole argument out of nothing from these like couple words. And it goes the other way with the boomers. As soon as they hear a young guy say something like, it's hard out there, all of a sudden here comes their the text wall in their head of, you're just lazy, you don't want to do anything, you just want everything handed to you, you want elite status automatically, the arguments that they're not making. And if you actually just wait and listen to people and see what they're saying, it's a lot more fruitful. I mean, I've actually been dealing with this all day on Substack. I've got people coming after me, telling me all these things that I said that I never said. Why are you telling people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps? I never said that. They heard me say it somehow because it's in their head already, but I never said it. And it goes on like that.
I was literally in your position on the wife jack debate. Like, it doesn't matter what you actually say.
Yeah.
If you have the boomer half of any particular controversy, you'll just have a horde of young Zoomers come after you, enraged. So I was on the boomer side of the wife jack controversy, and I had all these people coming after me with like, I understand that. I guess on the serious side of the conversation, keeping aside all of the boomers and Zoomer self stereotypes that appear on Twitter and on Substack, I guess the question is there a noble way that you can proletarianize yourself and just step out of the PMC, like class? Like, what is it? There obviously are certain ways you can do that. I'm not so sure even, becoming a wine owner, a vineyard owner, and a restaurateur, the way that many of my high school friends did who skipped college. Like, that's not exiting the PMC. That's just taking a different route to getting into the PMC. But what struck me as an interesting, but by no means proven proposition in the Librarian's article, and even though I disagree with it, kind of inspired me a lot to think in a different way that I hadn't been thinking about this issue is like, and this is sort of similar to what people like Paul Kingsnorth are saying. Like, is there a noble way that you can proletarianize yourself, like leave the PMC altogether, not in a fake way, like becoming a restaurateur, and still kind of live a fulfilling Christian life connected to those four pillars of meaning? And that is enticing and provocative, but also something that, like, I can't in good conscience say that there is a path like that I'm aware of. right? And that is something that struck me as kind of like, this is something that we have not explored as a thought space, as a pseudo movement.
So I didn't mention this in my piece, or I did mention this in my piece, I believe, a little bit, but I kind of elaborated on some further comments. Education. There is one of the problems, one of the reasons why you have this disconnect of people arguing online is that, and it's something, if you're not a teacher, maybe you don't really notice too much, but young people and older people don't spend a lot of time together. Almost no adults spend significant amounts of time among kids. They see their own kids. Maybe they coach a team, maybe 6, 7 kids, but just kids in the aggregate, young people in colleges, in high schools, in elementary schools, seeing how they are in the aggregate, seeing the generations come up. And that's why they just sort of project these ideas about each other, because they don't have much direct experience of each other sort of en masse. And I've said before in other pieces, as I mentioned here, there's a tremendous lack of people, especially from right-wing spaces, in education. And I don't mean public education. I mean private education. I mean getting involved in these things that are happening now. There's a huge revolution taking place in education, homeschooling, private schooling, micro schools. It's everywhere. And there's just a dearth of people. And if a lot of bright young men were to accept that calling and direct themselves, even part-time, even partially, into working with young people where they can make a difference in young people's lives at the foundation and help shape their values at the foundation, that to me is the best way to get away from that whole, and you could, now, frankly, you could make an argument that being an educator is part of the PMC, but I think you can actually take yourself out of that a little bit and actually say, my job involves transmitting transcendent values to the next generation, teaching children to love what's good, what's noble, and then sending them off into the world where they've at least got that commitment in their minds as they have to navigate all these economic and political challenges.
Yeah, so when I was observing this debate on Twitter, I realized that we make fun a lot of times. In my last 2 in-person talks, I have said, the gender war isn't real. The generation war isn't real. Like this is not a serious conversation about the systems that rule us. But the thing is that it's almost impossible to avoid in your thing. Like, why don't the generations talk to each other or work together? And the thing is that their experiences are massively different. And the biggest way that they're massively different is the way that young men basically date and mate. The system doesn't work like it did for the boomers. Like it radically doesn't work like it did for the boomers. And that is a huge alienating dimension that seems to keep the older generation just talking in a mode that makes absolutely no sense to the people who are 20 years old right now, or 25, or even 30. And I don't know how to overcome that. I mean, what would an organization? I guess if you had a right-wing organization, I guess like a lot of the ones that I'm trying to push forward, then you could have a lot older people who are kind of on the same wavelength as the younger guys. But psychologically speaking, in my experience, people who are boomer or older Gen X, their understanding of the world and what your 20s are for is just so massively different than the people who are actually in their 20s right now. I don't know how to overcome that problem, but any thoughts would be appreciated.
Giving us the easy questions.
Yeah, exactly. Solve the gender and generational gap.
I think being a teacher and educator is an incredibly noble and worthwhile calling, and if you're called to it as clearly you are, librarian, absolutely it should be encouraged. As long as you can make the practicalities work, live in an area where you could afford to live and raise a family ideally, and I know you go to extraordinary lengths to make that happen. I know you have more than one job, and I think you're incredibly impressive from that regard. This is kind of what I was trying to get at with the status conversation, though, which is that if you grow up in England in the middle class, as I did, you become very adept at abstracting class and status, which is a huge reality here, away from earnings and compensation. And so a teacher that earns £20,000 a year is firmly middle class and not working class, even though a plumber that earns £120,000 a year is working class and not middle class. And that recognition was precisely what I thought was missing from a lot of the BoomerCon's commentary, that shifting down a class is a more significant suggestion than they were accepting. And I thought your piece was eloquent and acceptable, because you sort of found a way to adopt a noble calling that, you know, interacts with multiple generations, can take you all over the country, is massively in demand, but allows, you know, you to step outside the elite track that I was advocating for. So I think like, being an educator is good, but that isn't an escape from the status mechanics, and that is a radically different proposition from working in fast food, which is where we started off. Getting all the different generations to collaborate, that requires an entirely different set of institutions focused around living proximate in multi-generation communities within the context of a functioning church and extended family circles and so forth. That's that's no trivial task as well.
Yes, I agree. Class in the United States and class in Britain, they both exist, but they have slightly different dynamics, mainly due to the fact that in America, we pretend we don't have social class. All of that, you know, has to be obfuscated. You have to pretend we're all really equal. Look, our billionaires wear T-shirts. Oh, it's awesome. Yeah. There's like this huge effort put into disguising the realities of class in America. And I think some of the discourse around owning a Chipotle or a Panda Express or whatever is boomers, you know, putting effort toward shielding those realities, right? So, see, I'm a district software engineer for a whole thing, and you're a Chipotle manager, and we make the same amount of money, therefore we have the same status in life. And of course, everybody knows we don't, but you can't really say that. Those realities exist, I understand, and it is a matter of losing face if your dad ran a software company and all this stuff and you end up managing a Chipotle. That said, there's a certain amount of security in belonging to a social class, of living up to other people's expectations, of filling the role that society has set aside for you. Those are good things. It's good to meet the expectations of your family and your peers and everything like that. But at the same time, there's an element of yourself you have to give up to do that. And more worryingly, potentially, and this is something that I was kind of addressing in my piece, there's compromises that you have to make that in the long run kind of sully you and draw you more and more into a world that is inimical to your values. Though the point I was making, you know, if your peers, if your people around you are embarrassed to see that you work at Chipotle or whatever, how embarrassed are they going to be that you're a Christian? You know, what's more declassé than that? You know, in America, you know, in the Democrat Party, I mean, they've removed basically all references to Christianity. It's an extremely secular world, the progressive technical class in the big cities and stuff like that. And if you want to make it in those places, I mean, what are you willing to give up to do that? To me, the only advantage, and yes, there are, managing a Chipotle, managing a McDonald's, managing any of those places like that, even if you're a franchise owner, there you are tied to corporate America. I was thinking more in terms of, I don't know the specifics of owning a Chipotle, but I was thinking more in terms of you're a franchise owner and you have some freedom and you're sort of a, you know, like a prosperous small businessman in your local community. That was kind of how I envisioned the job. Which would, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that is a huge distinction. Like I said, I had friends in high school who did like they didn't go straight through college. I might have done like a community college thing and then a vocation. Then it became like vineyard owners and restaurateurs. Those people did not like actually drop a rung on the class ladder. And I'm gonna just put a little bit of a challenge here for you, librarian. If I were a young guy and I was confronted with just kind of tapping out of the professional class, the first thing I'm thinking of is girls won't date me. And, this is something that I had a conversation with my parents about. They're like, well, why don't kids become plumbers in their 20s? And I said, well, that's because they got out of high school, right? So they get out of high school, and in high school, like the girls just date the boys. Let's say you're in a Christian high school and it's all properly chaste or whatever. But like, you know, there is sort of like a quasi dating thing going on, even if it's, even if it's totally chaste. Uh, and girls regard you as a prospect. But the problem is that now almost all girls go to college, and they do not regard blue collar men of who aren't, I'm sorry to say this, who aren't drug dealers, right? They do not regard blue collar men as prospects for long-term relationships or marriage. And I think that this is somewhat lessened in religious communities. But if it's anything like the middle class community I grew up in, and I have been told by Zoomers that this has not changed, you're really, until you become an independent business owner and you're on that track, your ability to access family life through meeting a mate is really diminished. And I feel like that has to be acknowledged somewhere in this conversation, and we have to kind of deal with it before it becomes a valid way of exiting, our admittedly very rotten PMC class. And for someone asked in the chat, PMC means professional managerial class. So I guess PMC class is redundant, but yeah, that's what I mean.
So in my experience, I've been teaching college since 2008. I've been teaching high school since 2014. And the places where I taught, whether it's college or high school, are generally working class to kind of middle class areas. I've had students go to Yale and law school and other places, but most of my students go into trades and go into professions, things like that, or rather than professions. And following up with these kids, I still maintain an old Facebook account that they've friended me on to keep me updated with their lives and everything like that. And I get plumbers, electricians, nurses, and they're all, married. They have wives. They're some of them are in their 30s now with kids that are 10 years old. I don't really see being a plumber or being a carpenter or something like that as a barrier to marriage. I don't really think if they're not getting married, it's not because the women don't think they make enough money. It's because the guys just want to have fun and not settle down. When you talk about women in college, for example,
Yeah.
there's a lot of, you're true. There are a lot more women in college than men.
Well, I'm
but if
kind
you
of
look
going from my personal experience where maybe this is a regional thing, right? But the the women, again, this isn't applied to the military. This isn't applied to highly religious communities, which I've seen this very, very different in those circumstances. But in modern blue America, like California or Seattle, the girls in college were looking for kind of a path to the shit-lib version of the white picket fence, which was definitely degraded and became much more feminist in the 2010s. But that's a different story. The women in these lower class positions, like who are working at Panda Express and Safeway and McDonald's, these people were, like I said, drug problems, highly promiscuous, and the men were encouraging that culture. This is something, if you find yourself in that position and that's your friend group, you're not on a track to get married. You're on a track to having a baby mama. And that's not something that's, I can't really make a pronouncement about how much the old model of being a plumber and being part of a blue cross working community with an attendant group of women who are interested in marrying men like that, I can't make a statement on how common that is in modern America. I do know that reality in the places that I have lived, which is admittedly the bluest and shit-libbiest places of America. That reality is not easy to find.
Let me make a distinction here between, because I think it's easy to kind of lump all this together.
Yeah.
There's if you ever read the book by Paul Fussell, Class.
I've not.
Right? It's a great book, really, really phenomenal.
Oh,
It's
I'll check
dated
it
now.
out.
It's from like 1980, but there's this sort of there's gradients in the working class. All right, the people I used to work with at the restaurant, they're basically almost underclass adjacent. They're underclass people who happen to be employed, but they otherwise have the habits of people who are in and out of jail, drug habits, mental problems, all kinds of
Yeah,
things
exactly.
like that. Right? That's a different creature than a skilled tradesman, than a plumber, than an electrician, than somebody like that. And I think their marriage prospects and general desire for marriage are very distinct things. So when I talk about my former students, this guy's gone on and he's a welder now and stuff. They've got wives, they've got a house, they've got kids, and that's a reality. But you're also correct that if I were to go down to the local Arby's and not so much, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is possible. Yeah, it's entirely possible to get a job as a tradesman, make good money, and get married. I mean,
I think that's absolutely right and really important to pick up on. But there's structures implicit in that I think it's worth making explicit, which is that you are changing dating pools and your life as a whole needs to change to reflect that. So that isn't just a shift in career, that's a shift in the way you should think about how you conceive of your life. Now, I can only speak from an urban British background, so the parallels here may not be exact, but I think, hopefully there's some underlying principles which will extrapolate across. There's two realities at once, one of which is that the girls that I went to university with, the girls that I went to graduate school with and so forth, they wouldn't marry a plumber. That's just the way it is. No matter how much he earned, they wouldn't marry a plumber. They were middle-class girls, born and bred, went to private school. They're not going to marry a plumber. None of them did. All of them married white collar, to the extent they're married. However, plumbers in the city I'm in get married and start families every day, and many of those women are excellent women. And I have a surprisingly strong number of women in my readership, which I never really expected because I thought I was writing to young men. But a good third of my audience are sort of like married Christian women.
Yeah, me too. It's weird. I don't know.
Yeah, no, it's great. But this is why I thought, the kind of Cernovich type advice was insufficient, was that he was saying you could just change a job without recognizing that all of the status dynamics of your life were changing. And that's why I said, I think it's a totally different animal. Entering into a trade, especially at a young age, what you shouldn't be doing is going to college, going to graduate school, and then becoming working or even underclass adjacent because of the money. Because what that will mean is all of the social networks that you spent time cultivating, all of your expectations about women, all of the women you will suddenly become less attractive to. However, if earlier on you fully embed yourself in a functional working class community and learn a trade, and you meet the women that those tradesmen meet, and you adopt that as part of your life, embedded to the extent you can in a sort of wholesome Christian community, then this has a far, far better chance of functioning. And it functions for people every day, as you say. But I just don't think this kind of model of conceiving of yourself as fundamentally middle class, elite adjacent, preparing your whole life for that, and then making a switch for purely financial or sort of like bootstrap reasons, you can't ignore all the subtleties that you also have to adjust if your life is going to progress in a functional way when making that switch.
You'd have to be really careful with proletarianizing yourself. And I think that's, it would have to be done very carefully. I don't even know how plumbers made women, to be quite honest. I wouldn't even know how to. This is kind of laying bare the class dynamics, because I don't know, to kind of bridge that. I always like the lower class to me is much more visible. What I call, to bring in a British person, the Theodore Dalrymple class. He describes this extensively in his writing, but like I know how the lower
Big fan
class,
of his.
Yeah, exactly. But I know how that functions because I see it every day, and I even kind of like go in and out of it in my or went in and out of it in my life. But I don't the sort of like the blue collar but non-degenerated class is a world that seems very apart from me. And I don't even, let's say I had a friend who was like, I'm not doing this college thing, I want to be a plumber. How do I not get sucked into the lower class here? I don't even know how I would advise him, to be quite honest.
So that's the world I came out of. My dad was a machinist, and he didn't finish high school. He worked in a tool and die plant, making machine parts and stuff like that. And that was what I knew about growing up. And no one in my family went to college. I was the first one in my particular. One of my cousins went to college a little bit after me, but I was basically the first male in my family to go to college. And that working class dynamic is very much a man works. You work, and the thing you don't want to be more than anything else is a bum. A man who doesn't work, a man who doesn't have a family and take care of them is a bum. He's at best, he's a comedic figure. He's someone you kind of laugh at. At worst, you just really have a lot of hostility for this guy. He just offends you just being around him. It's just awful. And that's kind of the ethos that I've taken up over the years. And even as I've sort of moved into a middle-class job, being a teacher, I retire every day. Even as I moved into that mentality has kind of stayed with me. So I'm sympathetic to these people. I grew up among them. I understand how they think, and I like to think I hopefully can look out for them, in that sense. They're not exotic. They're just people like anybody else. And to the point
can I ask
that
a really stupid question.
Go for it.
If you're a young plumber in your 20s, where do you meet your marriage prospects?
Oh, they're on social media like everybody else.
That's a really stupid question on mine. I'm just curious because
they're on social media like everybody else.
Social media.
They're they have friends like everybody else. They go to parties like everybody else. They go to church like everybody else. I mean, they're not they're not doing anything really different. They're just got their own kind of little working class coded versions of everything. They were all on MySpace at one point while everybody else was on. Well, the middle class people with college emails were on Facebook. But that was their thing. But yeah, they're on dating sites. They're on all that stuff. But to that point about proletarianization, the idea you don't want to proletarianize yourself if those jobs themselves are being proletarianized. Bit by bit, slowly but surely. And that's if you go on, ask anybody what you think about, go on Substack and say, hey guys, being a doctor must be a great job, right? And you'll get 500 comments from doctors. No, being a doctor sucks. You can't make any decisions. They've taken all your agency. Okay, how about being a lawyer? Oh no, they've regulated out of all. You can't make any choices. You can't do anything for yourself. You got to follow all these rules and stuff. I mean, all these things that used to be professions where you had independence and your volition and the ability to make your own decisions and everything, they're all getting proletarianized, right, by the people higher up who are strip mining them for value. Part of the reason medicine in America sucks is because it's been proletarianized in that way. Part of the reason law in America sucks is because it's been proletarianized in that way. Education definitely.
It's been proletarianized in that it has been standardized.
Yes, standardized,
regulated, but it has not been proletarianized in the sense that these jobs still create status.
That's
the proletarian has two dimensions to him. The first one is that he is an autonomous cog, of which all jobs are starting to resemble automatic cogs more and more and more. Ironically, as we automate more, we also make ourselves more into automatons, which makes no sense in my mind. So that's extensive across the class divides. What is different though about these email jobs is the fact that the email jobs still have status to them. In my egregiously long podcast this week, I went over just the lazy girl fake PM job that everyone complains about on TikTok. That earns less money than a plumber, but it has higher status than a plumber. So the lazy girl would improve her status if she married the plumber significantly, but it's just not. I don't see on social media that transition occurring.
That status is a lagging indicator. A big part of the neurosis around this conversation about Panda Express and everything, everybody wants these laptop email jobs because they, like you said, have the status and everything like that. But at the same time, kind of schizophrenically, those are the jobs that are getting filled up by lower cost Indians. Those, if the low status of being a proletarian comes from the fact that your job is fungible and highly regulated, then it necessarily follows that as being a lawyer, being a doctor, being whatever, is more and more standardized and more regulated, you have more and more supervision, then it too necessarily must lose status. And that's what everyone's terrified of. That's why they want the Indians gone, because
Yeah,
that's a
exactly.
signal that the job is losing status that they desperately want.
And the reason why the Indians take it is because they have their own status networks back home. That's why they're constantly on the phone. They don't need to worry about appealing to a status hierarchy that exists in North America, because their parents are lining up for them a mate in India so they can chain migrate over to North America or Europe. Right, where I shouldn't pretend like we're only North American here, but that's what's happening, right? They are not participating in the same status hierarchy, and therefore they can accept jobs that are, from American point of view, is completely mercenary.
Yeah. I think, Librarian, I think you're right to call out something very important, which is that if you're joining these jobs purely for the status of the job and the lifestyle that attaches to that job, you have essentially lost your way away from the political project that you, myself, and Dave are all pursuing, which is a fundamentally dissident path, right? Attempting to carve out a place of spiritual autonomy in the face of an oppressive society, because you've fully given yourself in. So that wasn't what I was advocating for when I was advocating for this elite path. What I was advocating for was the fact that it is possible not just to take the status accrual that you get from joining these companies to find, women, it's easier in the city, but also if you truly are able to go to the best schools, work at the best companies on the best teams and so forth, the money that gives you, the skills that you learn, the connections that you make, actually set you up for autonomy quite quickly as compared to corporate jobs further down the line. So if you look at everyone from, the obvious example on everyone's tongue at the moment is JD Vance, but within our own circle, we've got people like Charles Hayward, who was a lawyer and then an entrepreneur, using the skills that he developed with a very prestigious law career. That, as long as you have your mind always on that, how am I leveraging my temporary connection to this world of high industry and big business in order to gain, yes, the status I need to build relationships, but also the currency and the skill sets I need to transform that into something independent, you can actually arrive at a place of independence faster than you can if you enter into some sort of quasi-independent relationship with the system, where you take a lower status remote job that nevertheless finds itself tethered in some way to big business, like the Marriott example or the Panda Express example. So I think there's a sort of high path and a low path to independence here. Status within the worlds that attach to those paths are what I'm concerned about, not some measure of objective status. So there's the kind of trades path, or perhaps the manufacturing path, something like that. And then there's the I am in the game, I'm in the elite game only so I can transcend it path. And you don't want to get lost in the source, either in the world of big business or in the sort of proletarianizing aspect that you were discussing.
Absolutely, you could almost call it Project Humuswil or something, where your goal is to be that your goal is to be that anarch, in it but not of it. You've got your reason for being there, which is not the system's reason for you being there. You're making it work for you, and ultimately you are going to use the skills and the resources that you gain from this to not only your benefit, but more importantly to the benefit of the people who depend on you, especially people who are coming down, and even more broadly, society as a whole. Both those paths have their own challenges. The sort of dropout path, I don't care about the elite, I'm going my own way type thing. The pitfall of that is just sort of becoming disconnected from other people, the networks of support that you need to really affect something meaningful. And if you really go far enough down, if you're like, I'm just going to be a waiter and just forget the whole system, then you've got the pitfalls of that life of drugs and petty crime and welfare fraud and everything else that you got there. The pitfalls of going the elite route, and they're more subtle, I think, but I think in some ways more dangerous, is just that desire to conform and your whole sense of what's normal being warped by the people around you to the point where you don't even recognize your fellow countrymen as being like you in some kind of way. One of the big lessons of 2016, especially when Donald Trump came down the pike and everybody who knew everything, all the elites, all the people that, I've been in politics for 30 years. I went to Georgetown Law School. I've been in the Senate for this long, House for this long. Trust me, Donald Trump will never be president. And they revealed themselves in that one long moment as not knowing what's going on. They're supposed to be the managers and they can't manage people. And which is a huge, a huge blow to their legitimacy. And then you look at people like that, and why did they all think that way? Because they don't talk to anybody else. Because they've, whatever reason they got into that for, they've all been molded by the people around them into something very different. And so my hesitancy in encouraging people to sort of embrace that elite path is that you go in there thinking you're going to change things. You go in there thinking you're the subject, and you come to discover, maybe too late, or maybe you never do discover, that you've become the object. It takes a lot of ego security and spiritual strength to resist what the world wants to do to you. Even at my level, I'm no elite, but it takes a lot of that. And again, that goes back to education. That's why I encourage people to get involved in education, because that's where you make a difference with young people. That's where you fortify them for that struggle.
That's why I put them on a strict, if you're going to be elite, you have to be reading Evola every month. No breaks.
It doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt. But I have it on my desk for my students if they need it.
I think that the missing ingredient here, and what I see kind of flowing through all elements of this conversation, is there an alternative status hierarchy socially existing in the United States right now that is not just getting washed away by globalization? And if there isn't one, can we build one? Because that's the key ingredient that the plumber needs to appear high status to a good woman in 2025, that you might have carried over from the Bruce Springsteen and Billy Joel era, where Uptown Girl made sense to people. That's also the key aspect, the key, I don't want to say key app, that sounds so Silicon Valley. That's the key tool that's needed for other young people to hard reject the system in the way that people like Paul Kingsnorth are talking about. This is the missing piece. And the question is, is the old one, the old blue collar status hierarchy, still in place? If not, can it be replaced by something? And can the ones that are coming about perhaps off the internet stand in for those things? And I again, I think that the real barometer about this, even if you're going full Paul Kingsnorth, I'm going to be a mendicant Franciscan monk. The biggest barometers of status are always the fairer sex. Do the fairer sex see people like that, even if they don't want to date them, even if these people are celibate? Do they see people who are in this kind of lifestyle and go, that is a high status man? And if that occurs, I think you've got a legitimate alternative status hierarchy. But if that does not arise, then I feel like it feels a little bit like a meat grinder to me, right? And in order for me to talk about an alternative to the PMC white collar path for my son, which I'm not in the market for now, but I'm going to be really in the market for it in 10 years. In order for me and other parents like me to say, like, that is a viable alternative, it's got to have an alternative status hierarchy, so that it doesn't look like a complete meat grinder. It can't be like, grind your way into this complete dead end, kids, and then and if you fail, then I'll call you weak, which is that's like the low IQ version of the boomer side of this conversation. And I don't know. I mean, I guess Librarian in particular, do you think we can build something like this, or do you think something like this exists in areas of the country? I guess I already said that it did when I mentioned the military, but do you think that this more broadly exists in areas? And I can't quite see it, because I've lived my entire life in Shitlib Central and still do.
So I can say this, and I'm not the first person to say this, but I'm actually working on a piece about this right now. Authenticity is the currency of the future. There's a lot of things that have been happening over the past 20, 30 years where fake has just been piled on top of fake, falsehood, things that looked valuable, things that looked real, things that looked important, people who looked like they knew what they were talking about. And they all been revealed to be fake. And that's the world that young people have grown up in. They've grown up with, a fake economy, and then that fake economy crashed, and then a different version of a fake economy came into being where they gave banks free money. The prices of houses have risen astronomically, largely because of this inflation, and there's all kinds of other reasons. But the hollowness of the core of, we're going to go spread liberalism all over the world, and everybody will love us, and I mean, all of it. The bottom is just fallen out of this stuff, and in its place, I mean, look at the conflict in Ukraine. America went in there thinking that with this power of abstraction, the ruble was going to be rubble. We're going to leverage all this abstract power and ideas and stuff like that against Russia, and Russia is going to collapse. Russia didn't collapse. Russia is building real stuff. They're building real artillery shells and real tanks and giving real men real rifles and sending them into a real trench to slaughter other real men. And you mentioned the military as being the source of authenticity. That if anybody's credibility, they're like the tail end of that. Their credibility is going downhill. I mean, look at the Navy. Rusting ships lighting on fire at port, and they can't put $770, I think it was $1 million ship burned to ashes at a port because no one on the ship could put out a fire. That's where we're at.
I'm saying the military has more of a separate status hierarchy than
but even
like Panda
even
Express.
I think no, I would say the military, if anything, has been integrated so firmly into that PMC that it's lost a lot of credibility. A lot of people look at these generals are just migrating right over to Raytheon, and people in the service don't like that.
But if that's the case, that if everyone's getting absorbed into the PMC status hierarchy, then our ability to execute sort of based proletarianization of ourselves, that seems to be limited, right? I do admire the idea you put forward, but it seems like that might, if everyone's status hierarchy is getting absorbed into the PMCs, then it does seem sort of like you're cutting yourself off by the knees because you're not really executing the separation from the system that you otherwise would be if you were leaving, like, the standard white collar ladder.
Here's where I think the distinction is, right? So as jobs either become proletarianized or at the top level of them gets kind of shoved into the PMC, and that whole system is not doing good. It's very brittle. It's bad. It's proving to be, it's lost a lot of its legitimacy. I mean, all over the Western world, these people are being repudiated and shunned by the voters and everything. But in its place, I think, is coming this system of authenticity where you're going to see a privileging of people who do real things. With AI slop crowding the internet, you're going to see the idea of someone who can write as being like, oh, elite, that's luxury, that's something really special. Not everybody can do that. People who can still do actual art, people who can actually build things. That's going to be a something, I think, that's going to be a new signal of status. The more real what you do is, the more authentic what you do is, the more tangible and yet connected to some kind of deeper reality what you do is. The age of plastic is coming to an end. And I think there's helpful. Oh, so good.
Okay, no, don't let me cut you off. If you had a point to finish, fire away.
I was just going to say real quick, look at the changes, the administration coming in, where it's, with all the stuff happening in Russia, we need to start onshoring manufacturing again. We're talking about taking over Greenland and going over there and mining and building strategic bases and stuff. There's energy there, for young people. I tell the young men in my class, like, I'm jealous of you guys and what the challenges that are ahead of you and the things that are going to be available for you. I got kids telling me they want to go into logistics. I got a kid at the Colorado School of Mines that graduated a couple years ago. They got bright lives to look forward to. And if some girl turns up her nose at this guy with his mining certificate over and against this guy who went to law school, to me, she's making a mistake. She's made the wrong bet on the future.
I think I'm an optimist on this front as well, for a similar set of reasons to those you describe. If we were to examine this from a sort of systemic perspective, you might characterize the last 30 years of internal and external immigration in both my country and yours through the lens of someone like Charles Murray's coming apart thesis, which is that society was stratifying, it was localizing because certain areas were able to absorb all the high functioning, high IQ people, and that was having a detrimental effect on the rest of the country. In my mind, in the last 5 to 10 years, you've seen a competing sorting mechanism, which is reshaping both my country and yours, and indeed the international order more broadly, which has been referred to as the big sort, the great sort. And this is the idea that political polarization is now so great in some areas, and religious polarization and so forth, that people are moving for purely ideological reasons. So you're seeing huge inflows of people into places like Florida, huge outflows from places like New York, California, and so forth. Now, out of the back of that, I think there are two things. The first is that there are communities that are intact that actually definitely meet the specifications that we're describing, which is thick, functional communities in which real worthy things are rewarded by your peers in terms of respect. I know this because I recently wrote a piece which was called Why I'm Leaving Britain.
Yes.
And I received about 100 DMs from different people saying, hey, you should come live in my community.
I was
This
one
is
of
where
them.
you should live. And yeah, exactly. People tried to convince me to come and live with them. And some of the places they were describing sound incredibly tempting, just these wonderful functional communities. I had someone like send me like Rightmove listings to try and get me to move to somewhere in like upstate New York. And it was, and they were describing their communities. And I can tell you, there definitely are communities out there that are functional. They have strong churches, they have, good family formation. The other thing is that people are riding this wave intentionally, and our friends at New Founding are doing this. Ridge Runner with their project in Tennessee, or Kentucky, where they're building an actual community from the ground up, explicitly with the intention of attracting people that want to ride this big sort wave. And indeed, this was the reason why I declined everyone and their wonderful and generous invitations, which is that I intend to do the same thing with the European equivalent. So
And
I think
that's fascinating. I haven't gotten to the article yet, but I'm going to read it.
yeah. So anyway, I'm an optimist on this front, but still, I would advocate against the local Panda Express option.
Well, I think this is the I anticipated we'd get to this point where we're more or less agreeing with each other on the broad strokes of what what is and what ought to be, and the key thing that's sort of emerging from the last 3 years is this desire for this kind of alternative community, or this alternative network of communities, and this premium and authenticity. And if I were a young guy out there, I would want to see how I could tap into this new wave and become a part of it, because this seems to be the wave of the future. The people who want to live in their plastic world filled with H-1B slaves. I guess the only problem here is that that plastic world of H-1B slaves might have an overwhelming amount of the money and power, which we'll eventually have to contend with in the future. But it doesn't seem to have a future for anybody, really. It just seems to be a place of despair and fakeness, eternally reflected back in on itself. But I do think that there are these. I mean, I guess the only thing I have to say, though, to this whole process is, you can participate in this new world if you're part of the present PMC, or if you actually want to join one of these intentional communities. I think there's avenues available for both people. So the trade-off for young people, I think, is largely going to be how much you want to brown nose our current dying ruling class versus how much you want to roll the dice and kind of beat an alternative path for yourself, and maybe incorporate a little bit of that boomer Jack Kerouac kind of perspective in the process. I don't know.
Yeah, so then, and that's kind of, so the last critique you mentioned was sort of how I was interpreting the idea of status and being status conscious, right? Like, do you want status within this system, or are you trying to be the kind of person who has status in the next system. There's some overlap there between the qualities you'll have in each, but I think they are kind of distinct things. And at some point, you're going to kind of have to make a choice, which one you want to kind of go along with, because they each have their own values. One is an emerging set of values, a set of values I think that the Trump administration is not creating, but it kind of exemplifies, especially when you consider the youth of a lot of the people coming in. I mean, I know he's not the most popular guy in the world, but Vivek Ramaswamy, not an old guy. J.D. Vance, probably the successor to this whole MAGA movement, is younger than me. And that youth and what they're building there is this sort of robust. Not even
Matt Walsh is pretty young, right? Like people think he's old because he can't tell because of the beard, but he's a younger guy, right?
Matt Walsh.
He's like,
I think he's 30s, like early 40s, if that.
Yeah. Okay. So
maybe
he's
late
not that
30s.
Old.
Maybe late 30s. Yeah, he's not. And that's the thing. There's,
I guess, but I will push back here though, Librarian, right? Because what you're saying is 100% true, but that almost makes it so I'm kind of more angry at the boomer conservatives, because they have a lot of resources and they're not being put into these kind of radically alternative perspectives. In many ways, they're buttressing a concept, like an old concept of corporate ladders that feed right into the maw of our enemies. And so, I totally agree with you that if you're a young person participating in the new system, I mean, I don't think really the women aren't there yet, but I think they will come, and to a certain extent they already are there. Most people I know in my sphere have an easy time getting wives. But I can see that would be hard for a young guy in their 20s, right? The young women aren't really catching up on this wave yet, too, and building this new elite based around authenticity and loyalty and noblesse oblige. This is obviously the wave of the future, and the interesting people are the people who are building into that. But so many of these conservative politicians and leaders, especially in the Trump administration, especially in the last 2 months, that they're signaling that they don't want to build this alternative. They want to go back and pretend like it's the 1990s again. They want to go back and pretend like they're the status quo people. They're the guys of the good corporate economy. They're the guys of saying, oh, we have full employment. And, Chris Rufo did not say all of the boomer things that people associated with him in his initial post that kicked this off. But part of his, part of this conservative script where you point to job numbers and GDP growth and high sticker value on the stuff that you see coming off of monster.com, like part of that narrative plays into your standard 2000s and 1990s conservative, where they are not creating alternative social hierarchies or status hierarchies. They're just playing into the existing corporate one, cashing their check, and then going to grill, and then scoffing at the young people who have to pick up the pieces over the grill that they bought with the money coming from the boomer bucks who want to just have a de-wokeified version of the 1990s. And people are right to be angry about that. I want to the Zoomers are right to be angry about that. And that was very much on display.
Oh, I agree. I totally agree. The Zoomers are correct to be angry about this. First of all, I'm an optimist on this score because we have one ally against the boomers. Have lots of money. They have lots of status. They have lots of control over networks and patronage and all that stuff like that. But we have an ally. It's not a nice thing to say, but the Grim Reaper. They're old.
Well,
they're old people.
In Canada, where I live right now, Justin Trudeau has come in on the side.
Granted, he works for the Canadian state. That's true.
He sent the Canadian legions to go assist this process. Not to my liking, but
But in
the Grim Reaper has mainstream support. But I'll shut up. Go ahead.
It's the boomers are on their way out regardless. I think if you compare the first Trump administration with the second, the differences are obvious. There's no more Paul Ryan. There's no more Mitt Romney. I don't think Mitt Romney's around anymore. If he is around, nobody cares. There's no more John McCain. The vast majority of those people who were able to hobble him before are kind of gone. And even if they're not gone, they're going to be gone by the time JD Vance run for office in 2028. They're on their way out. If you're hitching your wagon to them at this point, you can get some quick bucks. You have no organic following. Everybody knows when you go on Substack and you read the Bulwark and they've got 100,000, 200, whatever they got, 200,000 subscribers. Everybody knows you go to the comment section, there's like 50 people. There's no real interaction. There's no real organic engagement. It's fake. And then you go to people like Johann Kurtz, like John Carter, that just started off just a man with a laptop typing away. And the engagement we're able to get, I don't even have a name. I don't have a face. All I've got are my words. All I have are my ideas, and I put them out there. And the engagement that I've gotten and the support that I've gotten just with that, without any marketing team, without any, social media buzz, without anybody giving me Paul Singer money. By the way, let me clarify. I don't get money from anybody. Okay. Rufo's not giving me money. Nobody's giving me money. Without any of that, just what I'm able to do. I mean, imagine what we could do if there was somebody who was just gonna, get everybody together in a network and promote us and, be like the actual right-wing version of the Daily Wire or something. I mean, there's a crown out there waiting to get picked up. Pick it up, somebody. Come on. Yeah.
As I always say, like the Daily Wire, I know they're not serious because there's just so much basically low-hanging fruit that they haven't picked. Like, for instance, like, why don't they do Shakespeare? That always just kills me. It's the easiest thing to do. There's an entire class of underemployed actors who just does Shakespeare. There's an entire pre-existing audience for Shakespeare movies, and they don't do it. Yeah. So I don't know. This whole if there's one thing that's kind of revealed itself to be fake in the last month, it's been, well, I guess I already knew these guys were fake, but this conservative apparatus, it's just not taking the steps necessary even to make their own kind of comfortable vision about how this repairs itself work.
I'm now trying to like place all the different Daily Wire personalities on top of Shakespeare characters and trying to figure out who'd be who. I think Ben Shapiro could make a good Puck.
Well, I would. You can't tell me you wouldn't pay to see that. At least, I mean, come on, I would.
I would. That would be awesome.
And let me be clear. I don't like. I give them credit where they do good work. I give everybody credit where they do good. I don't agree with everybody on the conservative. I consider myself right wing, not conservative. I think conservative belongs to that age of plastic where it was still possible to want to preserve the existing order, and that was a valuable thing to do. I think the existing order just needs to be reconstructed. So I'm not a conservative, but where they do good work, they do good work. Matt Walsh.
They gave me the biggest laugh I had this entire year when Robin DiAngelo took money out of her wallet and gave it to me.
Yeah.
Like Robin DiAngelo, such my own alma mater here.
Yeah.
It's just that was a very cathartic moment, and it was brought to me by the Daily Wire.
It's funny that a guy who's just basically kind of humorless can have that comedic sense. It's an odd, he's funny without really making jokes. He just has this sort of. He's able to get laughs even when the situation is just not really even calling for it. Robin, and then he was at the encounter, the meeting with all the people where he was talking about trying to overcome his racism. Have you saw that?
It was notably though more clumsily produced than a Hollywood production. Like it wasn't. Yeah. You could tell that the people, if he had the editors and the directors that made Borat, it would have been a lot better. And a lot of the cringe moments on the side would have been cut out. But we're off topic. Go ahead.
Yeah. On topic, if you're talking about building networks and stuff like that, one thing I've been saying to other people in chat rooms and stuff like that is that, the right really needs a class of producers and editors and facilitators, not just we need writers, but we need people who can organize right-wing material thematically, put an aesthetic behind it, put it out there. Rawhide Nationalist does a great job with Man's World. I mean, the aesthetics of that, the actual texture of the physical magazine is awesome. That kind of stuff. We need a class of people like that to kind of.
That's been very challenging. I'm on the front lines of that. Like Dudley New Right's done great work.
Yes.
Lomas has done great work, but expanding this, and this is the problem with, I've been more on the in real life meetup, which is connected to this whole like getting stuff out there. The problem is it's just so much more power now in being an influencer than there is in being a leader and an organizer. And I know that has to change at some point, but right now that's where we are. And there's also a lack of organization at the largest levels. There's a lot of people who are looking for opportunities and they don't know who to go for because we're not properly indexing the stuff that's available to them. But I think that there's one thing that should be clear though. If you're an artist or an op-ed writer, I think it's a good side hustle, but it's very, very likely that this will have to be a passion project for most of us, and for the foreseeable future at least, right?
One thing that the right gets wrong, and the Daily Wire's failure here is instructive, is that it conceives of this problem as one of a lack of cultivation of homegrown talent, and that's part of it. But also a part of it is an inability to capture highly skilled and experienced major figures from the establishment. And those figures exist, right? So it's notable that there's been no collaboration, for example, between a genuinely reactionary filmmaker like Mel Gibson and the Daily Wire. And there's been, there's all these these filmmakers that are indicating in their own work in a subtle way as outsiders that they have at least some reactionary sympathies. And
case in point, very notably, who is the podcasting network that rehabilitates Mel Gibson? It's not the Daily Wire, it's Joe Rogan, voted for Bernie Sanders, right? Go ahead. Yeah.
And part of the Daily Wire's problem is that they are they are felt to be, and they obviously are, part of the boomer machinery that is on its way out. And therefore they are perceived as a losing faction, even though the right as a whole is in its ascendancy. So the question is then, what would it take to genuinely seduce artists away? And this is why, and this might get a laugh, Bronze Age Pervert is an incredibly important figure in this regard. Mm-hmm. And that is because he is genuinely intellectual in a way that the conservative right has not been for a long time. And I say that as someone that is a devout Christian, a Catholic. Following his Twitter for me is like every 3 days sticking a pin in my eye when I see the latest thing he's tweeted about Catholicism or my beloved Adrian Famule or whatever. So
I just have him muted.
Yeah.
The follow and mute has become such an ubiquitous thing for me. Like I follow out of respect, and then I mute because I don't want to hurt your face.
But there's a lesson there, which is the pursuit of actual intellectual radicalism coupled with an artistic vitality. That is something that the right is going to have to do in order to not just cultivate, because building artistic talent from the ground up is very difficult. You need to seduce high-powered, experienced, connected converts as well. And those people are waiting to be captured, and the Daily Wire is failing.
Yeah, the Daily Wire is big time failing with that. All the intellectuals force on the right is in the distance here right now. I mean, with the exception of like some people are making gestures towards Yarvin. Like Yarvin appeared in the New York Times this morning. I could believe it, right? Because the elite, the progressive elite, is feeling insecure and they're testing the waters to see who they can make peace with. Now, this provides an opportunity for us in the fact that we can essentially create an intellectual space that is designed and framed to be dominated by our ideas. And we can do that by reaching out and building friendships with select people in the New York Times who are comfortable or who want desperately something new that is not an endless reflection of intersectional progressivism again and again and again. And like this is a huge opportunity, and like there's no end to people who are like this in our sphere. But the Daily Wire, it looks like more and more like a dead end at this stage, despite their ability to make Robin DiAngelo humiliate herself.
I mean, and with Bronze Age Pervert, credit where credit's due. I think one of his biggest contributions, obviously I disagree with his basic moral outlook, but just his ability to generate vocabulary, useful vocabulary, things like fake and gay and longhouse and stuff like that are really useful analytical terms. even if you don't accept the full implications of it, it's just a shorthand word for something people see and understand. Hats off to him. Good work. One advantage, I think, well, two advantages that we have on the right in terms of cultural impact is, first of all, that authenticity. All that, intersectional stuff, that is a product coming out of colleges. It's entirely astroturfed. It has no organic support. It is a status signal among people in the laptop class, a way of differentiating themselves from each other, scoring victim points in order to compete in an ever shrinking pond where big fish are eating little fish. We have that realism. We have that authenticity. Our beliefs are hard won from life experience, from deep study, not study to gain an academic position or to signal something to other people. I mean, we're the people that read the books no one else was reading when it wasn't safe to read them. We made a real intellectual commitment to this stuff. And now that it's becoming slightly more acceptable, there's a base of us out there. And the other advantage that we have is that we're cheap. There's a lot of people out there willing to produce top quality content essentially for free. And
it's because it's a passion.
Yeah. And that's key, I think. And I don't ever want this, what I do at least. Everybody else has their own views, and that's fine. For me, I don't ever want this to be anything other than a passion project. I'm happy to make money at it, and I'm very grateful for my supporters. But I want the freedom of not depending on my writing to earn a living, because that freedom allows me to express myself and say what I want to say and not have to worry about whether my family's going to starve because I got canceled or something like that, or I make the wrong faction wrong or something like that. But that's an advantage, when you've got people who are willing to do that, and you need somebody to write a script, or you need somebody to come along and supervise a production or edit something for your magazine. You've got people who love this, a big pool of people who love this, who are willing to do this. There's this opportunity out there for somebody who wants to come along. Chris Pratt, if you want to make something, you want to make a Christian movie, Chris Pratt, hey, come look us up. We'll see what we can do.
Yeah, I mean, this is there's a lot of interesting things going on here. Some people are saying, oh, Curtis Yarvin isn't a friend. It doesn't really matter if he's a friend or not. What matters at this stage is if he is a bridge. And this is oftentimes a lot of what, people who aren't so familiar with how intellect and art work is what we're really looking forward to right now. Is we need to develop alliances of friends who are actually willing to support each other economically, physically, and politically. But then what we're looking for bridges so that we can begin to start brain draining the old world. Because if you have to build a new elite from the ground up, it will take way too long. And without the brain drain, having a substantial alternative is going to be difficult to impossible. But I think that process is happening just organically. I guess, for the young guys out there, and I talk to Zoomers a lot, I just am so frustrated that I do not have a great answer to tell young people what to do economically. And my best answer to date is to do a barbell where you keep your passion projects on the side, and then you get money either from, a well planned out blue collar career path, or kind of the more typical climbing the broken white collar ladder as much as you can. But that is the path that is, to my best approximation, what I would tell to the Zoomers out there. And it's gonna suck, but it's gonna suck until we fix the system at a more fundamental level. And we need young guys to be functional and to have well enough lives in the interim so that we can carry the torch to the next stage.
Amen.
So we're coming up on an hour and a half. If you guys want to stay for super chats, or do you have anything else you want to say about the main topic before we move on to audience questions?
So real quick, where I'm looking at my computer, I don't see any chats. Am I supposed to be seeing them?
No, I have it in an entropy link.
Okay.
At the top.
Okay, I just want to make sure I wasn't.
Back in the days of censorship, I forswore monetizing any videos which meant that I had to use an alternative super chat system. So which is, I think Entropy is run by people who are vague political friends, but until we develop our own payment processing system, which has been a very difficult thing, and a lot of people have tried to do this, I use Entropy to do all my super chatting, and because I don't like going through Google.
Okay.
Well, if there's nothing more to say, I guess I will go to the first super chat. I can't pin this. That's the one disadvantage. Nervain VMaker for $10 says, for over 20 years, Con Inc. has insisted that the country is deteriorating and on the verge of collapse. When the young express sympathy with this view, they are told that everything is far better today than it ever has been before. How can one draw any conclusion other than that Con Inc. believes nothing? Yeah, I saw this coming from Hans Fine, whatever, the guy who does Lutheran satire. I'm a huge fan. If you haven't seen Lutheran satire, especially the stuff on the Reformation, then you're in for St. Patrick's Day. Then you're in for a treat. I split my side on those two skits in particular. But he's a conservative, and he comes on there. He's like, what are people talking about when they say that all the women have sort of children out of wedlock and have drug problems? And what are you talking about? What America do you live in? And I didn't know what to say to him. The America that you conservatives have been predicting was coming into effect. I mean, you guys predicted this again and again and again and again, and now you're shocked that it's here. I mean, did you think that all of those negative consequences would just stay exclusively in the African American community? It's, the problems in America start in the Black community, but they eventually go to higher and higher classes. That's how social problems occur. I've been gobsmacked by this. I don't know if you guys have seen a similar thing, but I've been gobsmacked that conservatives refuse to acknowledge the very social degeneration they've been predicting for decades. And I don't know what to say to them at this stage. The future has occurred. This is what happens. You should know it. You predicted this.
People have entrenched mental models of their reality in their minds that they just get lost in. I mean,
exactly.
When I told my friends,
it's not even the mental model; it's certain stages of the mental model.
Yeah,
it's always a particular time for conservatives. It's always at the time where, like, we could turn back from collapse if only you gave us money. Sorry, go ahead.
John Carter and I had a discussion recently about Ian McGilchrist's hemispheric brain hypothesis, in which people move from different models of reality, one of which is left brain, which is very abstract and doesn't question reality very often because it's so efficient processing in an abstract model, and then the right brain, which is cognizant of new information, changing realities. And to cut a long story short, McGilchrist's hypothesis is that everything about the way the world is constituted now is that we over-index on this left brain mode of thinking. But one way I've really seen this recently is when I made the decision and I announced it to my family and some of my friends that I'm leaving the city I grew up in. They just didn't seem to understand that I wouldn't want to raise my children here, because they have a very particular model of the city, which is focused on the cultural amenities of the city, basically. And it is unbelievably unsafe where I am right now. Like shocking crimes, home invasions,
Wow.
People getting robbed at baseball bat point, knives, regularly. And that is just sort of like tuned out of their reality, because that's an unfortunate blip in the sort of history of the city, but it's not. It's a daily reality that I'd be raising my children in. So what shouldn't at all come as a shock to someone that's thinking about the situation from the reality, first principles as it stands now, is shocking, because they have an entrenched mental model, which is their reference point.
Yeah, very, very well said.
It also is just a function of democratic politics. I mean, as in not Democratic Party, but just democracy as a whole, where you're promising so many different things to different constituencies at the same time that you're able to maintain this kind of cognitive dissonance in your head. I mean, look at Ronald Reagan's platform, basically. You had free market capitalism, that was one pillar. You had social conservatism, you had aggressive anti-communism, and you had small government. Those things didn't go together. You can, but that was the pitch, and that was the pitch from Ronald Reagan all the way up to Jeb Bush. And when you're able to maintain those two conflicting ideas in your head at the same time, you can go quite far with it. Look at the idea behind the Ukraine war. Russia's a failing country. It's a gas station with an army. Also, they're going to conquer Europe. Which is it? It's an artifact of the way that power communicates to the masses, where they don't feel like they need to be intellectually coherent. But when people do figure it out, like, people look at Con Inc. now and they're like, you're saying two different things at the same time. Then it kind of becomes a problem, because once people understand it's propaganda, then it doesn't work.
Yeah, good point. I'm going to go forward. Aspiring Misanthrope for $10. I just want to say, got into it with Shagbar Kick. Well, he was the guy that gave the famous dumpster dive, sleep in a ditch tweet.
I was wondering where that came from.
Yeah,
somebody
Shagbar.
commented on you. Yeah.
So it is a non-parody account, but I think this is also the guy that said that you should look for a girlfriend by going to the gas stations of America, and asking the women out. And it was so funny because I was just on a cross-country trip across the United States when that happened. I was going to a lot of gas stations, and there were very few virginal Christian maidens waiting to be swept off their feet there. So he says, I got into it with Shagbark Hick, and I kind of lost my cool. But Johann's opening statement is crucial to understanding the Vermeule one. The system is always rigged against truth-seeking, God-fearing young men, but treating that as a non-issue is infuriating. Yeah, I think that echoes a lot of the sentiment that we've expressed here. I'm going to move on to the second one just so we get a few of them before we discuss. Aspiring Misanthrope for another super chat says, DJ Peach Cobbler video from a couple years back, American Caesar, lends to a very useful viewpoint from an obviously intelligent, observant young man in America who looks at his prospects with something less than optimism. The people didn't fail the Republic failed the people. I kind of agree with that too. Let's do two more. Ben Vanderpool for $3 says, I dropped out of college and became an aircraft mechanic. I make good money, but the lack of status shows. All the people I know in the blue collar fields feel beaten down and not respected at all. I think that's actually, we should respond to that. This is, again, my sense and my very big hesitation at recommending the blue collar path to people is that there is no status hierarchy that the elites respect in modern blue collar work. And I keep on thinking back to Bruce Springsteen and Billy Joel in the 80s. I don't have any memories of the 80s, but I remember those songs. And those songs indicated, like things like Allentown or Uptown Girl or Born in the USA, that indicated there was a certain respect in blue collar work, such that the elites and the artists were spiritually one with them. And without that, it's so hard to recommend blue collar work to people from my point of view.
Well, I mean, you'll hear the same thing from lawyers and doctors. I don't feel respected anymore. I don't have any agency anymore. Nobody, the job sucks now. 20 years ago it was awesome, but now it's terrible. I mean, I would say it's definitely gone beyond the working classes. I think.
Oh, I think the complaints you hear from lawyers and doctors are just starting. Right. I think that you're right that they're on the same trajectory, but it will take them like 10, 20 years to get to where auto mechanics are right now.
I mean, possibly, but even still, it's the fact that it's not just that class. Like, in other words, if you're saying I don't recommend a blue collar job, I want instead of being a mechanic where airplane mechanic where you're not going to get respected, you should be a lawyer where you are going to get respected. Well, by the time the kid gets into that job, he's not going to be respected.
But yeah, there's a lot of truth there, Librarian. You make a good point. But being pre-med is going to attract women to your status game way more than being an apprentice plumber.
And let me say,
that also needs to be said as well, right?
Let me say something real quick, just in general about the whole status thing, right? There's definitely something to be said, and it might sound cringe or like a boomer moment or whatever. There's something to be said for just not caring what people think. There's a status in that.
Yeah.
There's a status in You look somebody in the eye when they ask you what your job is, and you say, I'm an airline mechanic. And if a girl turns her nose up at that, you just show how indifferent you are to it. And there's something
that's
about
hard. That's easier said than done, though.
it is
Right? I
easier said than
totally agree
done,
with you,
but
but it is way easier said than done.
I think you can get pretty far like that. And if you take the opposite path, if you say to yourself, I want a job where I have the status to get a girl, and you get that girl, you know in the back of your mind that to some degree, she's with you, not because of you, but because of your status. And if you lose that status, you lose her.
I kind of agree and disagree. Women, I think that this whole red pill thing where women only care about money and status, like it's overplayed, right?
Mhm.
It's overplayed and it's exaggerated. And I think young guys take it to heart way too much and they end up shooting themselves in the foot. But at the same time, there is a little bit of money and status that you need to kind of wave in front of women's eyes so that they end up giving you a chance in this world and so that you can build the deeper things with them. So I think it's not as simple, right? As just saying, oh, I can just say F you to status games. I think it's a very special type of individual that can do that at like in the face of everything. And for most average guys, they need kind of a story about how their life trajectory is going to end up with the respect of a community in order to get women to kind of give them a chance to shoot their shot. And
what a woman's look, well, so there's so much nuance here and we don't really have time for the full psychological breakdown, but a surface level woman will be interested in status for status's sake, right? She wants to just immediately be assumed into that high status world and enjoy all the, the blessings that come with that. There are a class of women, and I would count my own experience with my wife in this category, who, as a perfectly natural precursor to not knowing anything about you, not knowing how competent you are, not knowing how intelligent you are, how disciplined, how serious, will just look for evidence of your achievements so far and the path you're on and how that typically maps to these attributes that she should genuinely be looking for in a provider and a husband and the father of her children. If you meet a good woman, once you're in a relationship with her, off the charity that she has extended to you based on whatever status you're able to, as Dave said, dangle it in front of her, if you're able to then demonstrate the true underlying virtues that status was initially treated as a proxy for and show her benevolence, leadership, competence, confidence, all of these things. In the case of my wife was very happy with me saying, listen, I know it was never on your life path. I know none of our friends are doing this, but we're going to get married very young in our 20s. We're going to start a family very young in our 20s. And we're going to carve out a path here. And I want you to trust me based on what you've seen of me so far to chart out that alternate route. And my wife is amazing. She stuck with me when I basically bankrupted the family, and we're out of it now, but having children does that. And so that's what you should look for. But I probably wouldn't have. My wife is an amazing woman. She was at one of the top university programs for her specialty in the world. I probably wouldn't have been able to get that first date and prove the first steps of that journey had I not been on a similar trajectory myself.
That story makes me admire you even more, Mr. Kurtz. So that was a Giga Chad move. I have to say that I was even though I had an edgy blogging side hustle, I think I was kind of more, I present myself more as a safe choice for my wife. But my wife has been amazing in the fact that we've moved everywhere at this stage, and she's stuck with me every step of the way. I mean, you cannot understate the value of a truly loyal woman. And I always say that I will everything when I tell what women would look for in women, I say the three things I look for in women are how loyal of a personality is to a man like you. I don't think loyalty is an abstract thing. I think that are you the kind of man that this woman would be willing to do what you just said, take that kind of risk. And I feel truly blessed to have a woman like that. And it sounds like you are too, Mr. Kurtz. So that's amazing. I'm going to go on and continue to read super chat so don't run out of time. Does having successful artistic pursuits help with class? Wait, okay, hold on. One before that. Glow in the Dark says, if boomers want guys to meet girls the way they used to, it's if boomers want guys to meet girls the way they used to, is by telling the boys and girls to do it how they used to. See, boys can use these methods only if the girls wish to meet them there. Otherwise, you need a different strategy. Maybe an even older way of having parents help find your spouse. I mean, that would be, if we could fix the dating market and go more back to an arranged marriage or just a marriage model of dating, this would solve an enormous number of problems with how we think about these issues. And it would for once get men and women on the same side, which has just been in this gender war, or sex war to be more accurate, has been this incredibly destructive thing to our discourse. And it all comes down to this dating problem. And I don't know. I mean, like, uh, who's going to set up arranged marriages? Certainly not boomers. And then Leo John Ginned says, does having successful artistic pursuits help with class, music, theater, and acting? Any reaction to those tweets?
I think a lot of the discourse around status, in terms of dating and everything like that, it's bound up with this consumerist model of everything that's been foisted on us by neoliberalism, to where men and women look at each other as these kinds of accessories that showcase a successful life. I'm a high status man because I've got a 10. And the woman's looking at the guy like, oh, I'm a high status woman because I've landed this high status man, where you're not looking at this person as a partner on a spiritual mission. You're looking at this person as they have the following economic characteristics and social clout, and therefore they're high status. And I think a lot of that is the reason why the dating pool is so screwed up. If you don't think of a partner, man, or a spouse as someone who's on a life mission with you, who you need in order to be fulfilled fill your proper role as a human being, if you're not going to be a celibate committed to asceticism or something, I think that you end up with these distortions where people, well, if I can't get what I want, I'll just be promiscuous or whatever and be on the dating market forever. There's no downside to that. I can play video games, I can go to bars, I can live freedom, and quite honestly, to be perfectly blunt, I think a lot of the people online who are saying things like, oh, I can't get a wife because I don't have status, a lot of these guys don't want wives. They like the freedom to focus on themselves and do whatever they want, and they understand that having a wife comes with sacrifice. And a lot of them, frankly, just don't want that. And this whole thing about, well, I don't have enough, I don't have money, so I can't get a girl or anything. I think to some degree, that's a bit of a dodge.
Yeah, it's hard because the unsuccessful CADs are lumped in with the unsuccessful dads in these complaints. And when they appear to you on Twitter, you can't tell the people who, who genuinely want a wife and an opportunity to meet a woman in a more sane dating market. And then, the random coom brain losers who are just upset that, they've tightened the valve on the pussy intake. Sorry to be crude, but borrowing that from a Sam Hyde sketch, right? It's two different kind of people, but their complaints sound identical online. As for the artistic pursuits, how does that help with class? I think it helps enormously. If you have artistic passion that you're pursuing in a serious way, you will climb the class hierarchy, even if you have a low class profession. I don't know if it fixes all of your problems because it doesn't help with the money thing, but it definitely helps the perception of class. And if you're a young guy, learning something like a musical instrument when you're very young, it's pretty invaluable.
There's no amount of ugly that rhythm guitar can't fix. Ask Lenny Tillman.
I guess so. Keith Richards has proved that. Or I'm sure there's a better example, right? Anyway, Sam153 says, excellent guests and discussion, Dave. Will the coming university system collapse solve part of the problem? is there still status from being a defunct post-secondary institution. Also, Panda Express sucks. Yeah, I don't like that restaurant very much at all. It always just feels like sugar to me. If the university system collapses, then that will be an incredible acceleration for generating an alternative elite. I can't, if the university system collapses in the way that's being implied here, there will be an alternative elite that arises almost instantaneously because everything about the modern elite stands on top of, in particular, the Ivy League schools and the elite research institutions. So the problem is I don't know how fast the university system even can collapse because it's so entrenched in power and money. Like I don't like, what if your community college collapses, no one's going to care. If your state college collapses, people will care, but the system is not going to tilt over. If Harvard, Yale, the University of Chicago collapse, Brown, Stanford, then the ruling class is going to topple. Like it's going to fall like a hammer dropped into a well. But I don't see that happening without. Man, it'll happen eventually. But man, I don't know if I would, bet on it in the next 10 years necessarily. I don't know if you guys got thoughts on that.
Librarian's the person you should really speak to because he's actually in that world. But what
Yeah.
I would suggest is that it's probably not going to be a clean transition from one to the other. I just think you'll see institutions like Hillsday and other colleges just gradually grow in prestige within certain segments of the population, while others decline in certain segments of the population, and there'll be increasing polarization overall, which ties into other questions that were asked as well, which is if I was a young man and I still had the time to decide where I went to university, college, I would heavily biased towards Christian one over a
Yeah.
theoretically higher status mainstream one. That is a good place to meet a woman.
Oh yeah, for meeting women for sure. And any environment where your dating market is a marriage market and not a dating market is a better place to meet a woman. That is absolutely true. Like women just behave differently when they think that they're trying out potential husbands rather than I hate this word, potential sexual partners. But yeah, 100%. I'm gonna keep on going here. Darth Calhoun says, Dave finally made a stream. I went on a date with a girl who goes to the SSPX. I'm FSSP. We had a great date, and then she said she doesn't want any children. I was shocked. What's your advice? Well, for those of the Protestants in the audience who don't know the acronyms, SSPX is a heretical or excommunicated branch of the Catholic Church that celebrates Latin Mass, and FSSP is the loyalist or communicated section of the Catholic Church that celebrates the Latin Mass.
Dave, I'm going to have to correct you there slightly, otherwise you'll have SSPX people trying to kill you in your comments.
Are they not excommunicated?
They're not excommunicated. They're in, I've forgotten what it's called, but like a special status, which is like a kind of unresolved certainty. But they're certainly held by great suspicion by papal loyalists.
Yeah. Okay. So Okay. So thank you for that correction. I knew that Benedict was trying to bring that back in more formally, but thank you for that correction. So you saved me from like 20 comments, angry comments. So thank you. But for the dating advice, if a woman says she doesn't want kids and she's in a community that wants kids, that probably means that she means it. A lot of women in secular dating environments will say that because they'll think that it's what the guy wants to hear. And for me, a woman who doesn't want kids, like really doesn't want them, not just saying that because she feels like that's what you want to hear, that's a little bit of a red flag for me. Actually, it's kind of a larger red flag for me. So if you want kids and a woman's telling you that she doesn't, I think you might want to move on to a different prospect, because that's one of those things that's just a very irreconcilable difference in terms of your vision of mission for the relationship. Yeah, unless there's a story there, right? If there's a story there, then maybe it's different. Our Astoidal Assassin for their super chat. Why are right-wing women offended by your body, my choice thing? It's in response to baby killing. It's like disparaging a murderer who says, my knife, my choice, with your knife, my choice. Well, this is one of the great mysteries of 2024, where almost all of the women just got spontaneously angry at all the men across this year. And I think it was because online memes started migrating into their schools. That's my best guess as why all of these women got angry simultaneously. And, your body, my choice, when it's in an internet argument about abortion, is more or less benign. When you have some jerk using that to harass girls on the playground, who like some kind of shitty, I'm not sure the guy's fine, but guys like oftentimes young men uh, act like delinquents to young girls on the playground, and if they're quoting Nick Fuentes while they're doing that, all of a sudden, it's really offensive and really gross, and it feels bad. And I think it's experiences like this that caused a lot of women to immediately turn on the online right, even though they had no real ideological or substantial objections to what we talk about in these spaces. When things crawl offline and start being used as a mode of playground bullying, then there's a problem there. I think that problem is more of an internet problem than it is a right-wing problem. And every time I've engaged with people who brought this critique to me, it's just been like, so you're just complaining about the internet existing. But I think when you encounter these objections from women in particular, it's because it's being used in this perverse way. But any thoughts on that, guys?
It's just some groiper stuff that's designed to elicit that kind of reaction.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think anyone, actually thoughtful. What's the point of even saying that? Your body, my choice. Like it.
Well, it's a taunt that's used
Yeah.
in the debate about abortion.
Yeah,
But if
which
you
is
bring that taunt from a debate about abortion to like a bully harassing a girl on a playground, then it
yeah.
smacks way different,
But I mean, even like the underlying premise of it, like your body, my choice. That would allow for the possibility that I could decide for you to have an abortion.
Well, yeah,
Like
but it's
I
like
mean,
it's like a yo mama thing, like it's just
yeah,
like you're dissing me, I'm dissing you, right? That's what it is.
yeah,
That's the spirit of it.
yeah.
Uh, you know, I whatever you say, I'm going to say the exact opposite of. It just I don't know if there is some way that we could completely segregate the internet so that people with autism could be on one side and then all women could be on the other. Everyone will be way happier.
Yeah.
I'll say that right now. Um, Andrew Freegon says, as part of the laptop class, I feel extremely unfulfilled. I struggle often to not just leave this job and run away to do a blue collar one. I really sympathize with this. I frequently feel that my job as a algorithm consultant, I feel like I'm not doing any good for this world. I feel like I would much rather just be doing roofing and then sparing my brain for writing more articles and doing more organizing. I 100% sympathize with that sentiment. But that's just the thing that I do to bring in the cash. Any thoughts on that, guys?
So can I say that just as part of my general ideas about how to restructure things so you can have more meaningful, work. I mean, thinking of yourself as having a job, I think is something where you get stuck in this. Well, my algorithm work isn't meaningful, or my laptop class thing isn't meaningful. What if you did a bunch of different things? I teach live in school, and I teach online college classes, and I write, and I do leatherworking, and I have a lot of things I do. And so if one of them isn't fulfilling, I've got this too. Why not do algorithm stuff and teach at a college at night? Why not learn carpentry and then do your laptop job, and then on the weekends pick up some carpenter work and build cabinets in your garage and sell them and stuff, and maybe get to the point where you can do what you don't like so much less and what you do like more, and then you're also a little more anti-fragile. You don't have to worry about
Yeah.
somebody firing you, and you've at least got this thing to back up with. I think I would say don't quit your laptop job and go to a blue collar job. I would say try to do both and get a different skill set.
I think with an adjusting attitude, you can look at it like this is the thing that I do for money. And I think we're all moving back towards this idea of a household economy.
Yeah.
And this is one thing too, that there's no amount of money you can ever earn that won't be immediately absorbed if you live in a place that's financially infeasible. That's something that I learned. Well, I learned it once, and now I learned it again in a harder way when I had a family. And so part of your job is just making sure that you're constantly making investments for your community, but part of that's going to be taking some risks and going into debt sometimes. But it's a household economy. It's not just like this is what I do, this is who I am. And the same thing is true for women. I'm like, they can bring in money or they can save money, and it's kind of the same thing. If it depending on how it sits on the balance sheet, right? It's not about being a cog in an industrial machine. It's about what we're doing, making families and making communities, and making this sort of alternative vision for civilization work. Last two. Okay. Asteroidal Assassin says, how do we even get women out of this prostitution mindset? If you have two 16-year-olds in Africa marrying and living in a shack without electricity, but in America, women are just incapable of falling in love. Well, I don't know what to do about. I mean, I know how to solve the problem if like them in real life, I guess. But how to solve the OnlyFans problem is a difficult one.
I think you have to be really sensitive to a woman's natural temperament, because the environment overall is incredibly anti-human, as
Yeah.
described in the comment. However, I mean, again, I point to my wife. She's the clear example for me, obviously. She was raised in a completely secular, I would say even anti-religious household, and in a a culture that was exactly as is endowed with all the sort of negative cultural baggage as America is. And she was just sort of naturally skeptical of that, and resistant to that in some way. And on the surface, of course, some of that programming inevitably seeps in, but there are people who are just constitutionally built. And I think honestly, like a lot of us are the male equivalents of that. I mean, we grew up in the same cultural desert that everyone else did, and yet we've always had somewhere deep down inside of us this kind of like thirst for the truth and for good ways of living. And there are women right there that are the same. What I would say is, like, if you're a young guy, you really need to be using those years well, because this is so much easier if you find a woman when you're in your early 20s and she's in her early 20s or late teens, and you just like make a long go of it early on before she spent a long time single in her 20s and 30s, which is when like cultural norms start to calcify. So
Yeah.
just try and use those years well, and form relationships. I mean, it's never too late, but I would say don't be blackpilled by the overall state of society, because there is a huge amount of variation in the different temperaments of women, and try and look past any like surface level cultural adoption, which is ubiquitous, and get a sense of, and also like do your best to look in places that are sensible, right? So like churches, Christian schools, etc., etc.
Those are hard to find. I mean, I said I wish I could have done that. I got married in my mid-30s, and we both always say this is what couples always say. They get. I mean, I think she's in her late 20s, but we always say like we wish we could have met 6, 7 years earlier, and things have been so much easier. That's what everyone says, and it's true. Don't ever write yourself off, young guys. You'll have lots of chances in your 30s, but if you can get this going earlier, you will have a huge advantage. So just keep that in mind. um Okay, last one says from Hobby, says, evening, gents. I'm attending Duke of York. I attended the Duke of York. It was good. It was tall green suit. So he attended the Company of Adventurers event that we ran in Toronto, I think is the idea. My life is an interesting test of this conversation. Father retired as a top level airline pilot and AF officer. I studied Euro masonry and now own land. I chose a hard exit and married well at 24. TBD what status building gives. Well, that sounds like a pretty awesome life plan, man. You did Euro masonry, own land, and married well at 24. That sounds like you're set up. I'm glad that you came to the event. I'm trying. It's always very difficult to match the faces that you talk to at in real life with the icons on the screen. But it was great talking to you. Yeah, I mean, if you can do masonry and marry well at 24 and own land, then you're in an ideal position to kind of be your own master and start building some of these things that are coming into focus these days. Well, at any rate, that's the end of the super chats. And are there any thoughts, gentlemen, before we close for this evening? Thank you so much for coming on and offering your insight. I just want to tell my audience these are two of the best writers on Substack, in my opinion. It's the rivals would probably be counted on my one of my hands. And if you're not subscribed to Becoming Noble or the Library of Solano, then do so right away if you're on Substack. Or if you're not on Substack, you'll still see them frequently in the New Right post because they frequently win post of the week there. Any closing thoughts, gentlemen?
Ise Kelano.
Kelano.
Ise Kelano.
Wait, that's me.
Yeah. It's also Kaiser, not Caesar. And it's also Vidi Viki too.
No,
it has
the only thing I
last
want to
one.
say.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, the only thing I want to say is I had a great time, and thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me as well. Very glad to be here, and very nice to meet you both semi in person.
Yeah, certainly. And guys, I will definitely be trying to have you on for another conversation. West Coast is the worst place to have people on because everyone always says my availability is too late for them. But we'll try to find something that makes it work in the future. And thank you so much for coming on this stream. Everyone out in the audience, have a wonderful rest of the week and a blessed evening. Good night.